Thanks for being with us and welcome to our next in this series on data governance, Unlock Copilot's Full Potential. I'm Gareth Davis, Kick-Out Specialist at Cloud Essentials. I'll be introducing today's webinar, top and tailing as we like to call it, which is the easy part of introducing what's coming, and then the wrapping up with some key takeaways and an exciting offering at the end, so stick around for that. Thankfully, I've got a star team to help and guide us through this session to make it sure it's insightful. From the Cloud Essentials team, we've got the brilliant Johann van Schalkwyk, our Managing Director and Head of Solutions. We've also got our fantastic compliance lead, Nivasha Sanilal, talking all things legal and risk and compliance and how that ties in with the technology. And today, we've also got a very special guest from Microsoft that we work closely with here in the UK market, Mr. Purview himself, Eoin Fahy. Eoin is the security specialist for Microsoft, only known as Mr. Purview during working hours, so bear that in mind. Eoin, welcome. We're very much looking forward to your insight today. It really should be a great session where we mix the knowledge and expertise from Microsoft and Eoin on the technology front and tie that in with our expert team at Cloud Essentials for successful deployment of Microsoft Purview. So just before we dive into it though, just a reminder for anyone new webinar series of who we are, what we do. So Cloud Essentials, long-standing and dedicated Microsoft 365 partner. We specialize in the areas of content management, so help organizations mature their approach in areas like reducing the risk profile of your content in M365, migrating and managing that content cost effectively, and ultimately opening up the value in content so you can surface it to your business advantage, really, especially in today's AI landscape, which we will be diving deeper into today. We also cover multiple other areas, so where we have a team of experts, including complex migration projects, backup and retention expertise, also Power Platform application development expertise, Azure architecture, and we also delve into the world of e-discovery as well. So feel free to follow up with us on any of those areas, as well as today, which is data. The next slide, current world of Cloud Essentials. So these are some of the projects that we're running with at the moment on data governance and the deployment of Microsoft Purview, all on that journey that we'll talk about in more detail later on, which starts with a foundational deployment of Microsoft Purview. And all of these you can see on the screen have some common elements. So, we're talking regulated industry status, we're talking the size of company, place high value on their content, also their overall investment in Microsoft. And just to highlight some of those, and from looking at the registrations, they tie in quite a lot with the sectors that we've got on the call today. We're talking global financial services company with a huge presence through 41 markets. There's also a big construction engineering company in there, which is highly regulated. International mining company, sort of complex multi-geography regulations and policies to look at. Massive global chemical and energy company, again, complex, highly regulated. Large government agency, which are very complex, as you can probably imagine. And we also have a lot of success in the legal space as well, which goes sort of broader than just Microsoft Purview. A lot of automation and Power Platform application development in that space as well. As we'll discuss, data governance really is a hot topic in this age of AI. We're seeing this with these deployments, and it's accelerating the need to deploy solutions to secure your data. Right, we're going to get going. Do fire questions at us as we go along in the chat, and the Q&A section is provided. So we will try and get to these if we have time at the end. I'm firstly going to pass you over to Eoin from Microsoft, who is going to start with the technology side and to give you a little bit of background on, why securing your data is now front and center. So Eoin, over to you.
Thank you very much. And I don't think I've ever been called Mr. Purview before, but there's a new one. I do think if you say Purview 3 times, I probably do appear. And the reason for that is my role in Microsoft is I'm a security and compliance specialist, primarily have been working across regulated sectors, particularly the legal space. And since the advent of AI over the last, could be 2 or 3 years at this point, there's been 2 hot topics that organizations have wanted to speak to Microsoft about. The first is, how can I leverage AI and what are the potential use cases? And the second is, how can I secure and govern this in my industry? And look, it'll come as no surprise why organizations are looking at that with us. If we just look at some of the stats that have recently been released, we can see that on average users are saving 30 minutes a day or 10 hours a month using Copilot. Organizations want to avail of all the benefits it can bring to their business, with the real and important figure that are looking at is that $3.50 for every $1 invested in generative AI is the expected return on investment. However, it's not without its concerns. What we're seeing on the inverse is a lot of organizations are concerned around the ability to protect their sensitive data when using generative AI, the lack of visibility of what AI tools are being used and how they're being used, and then finally, the increased and the existing regulations that they have to adhere to, and how generative AI will play a role in that, and how they can demonstrate adherence to them. So what this generally creates is a little bit of a conflict between those that want to drive value using generative AI and leverage the innovation that's available, and those that just want to take a slightly more measured and tempered approach and say, before we dive right into this, how can we ensure that this doesn't have adverse effects for our business? And this begs the question, how can organizations leverage generative AI to drive value while managing risk? And this is very much what we're going to talk about today. I'll be talking through the technology, and the team in Cloud Essentials will be talking about how they can help bring this to life. Now, before you look at any generative AI tool or you're trying to assess the risk, it's really important to be aware of something called the shared responsibility model. This isn't a Microsoft concept. This isn't an AI concept. This is a general concept that exists within the obligation of the vendor, and what is the obligation of you as an end customer or the organization using the technology. So with generative AI, from a Microsoft standpoint, if you're using Copilot, it's Microsoft's role to ensure that the infrastructure that Copilot resides on is secure and robust. It's difficult to penetrate, and ultimately it's a robust kind of attack surface area. Similarly, Microsoft's obligation to you is that we do not use your data to train our foundational models. And if you are assessing generative AI tools, that's a really important question to ask the vendor, because that is not necessarily the case for all vendors. Some vendors build their foundational models based on the into them, and the risks of your users' AI tools, consumer tools, use your data to improve their capability. When we think about what your obligation will be, and this is very much where we'll focus on today, you can really break it down into three things. Is controlling and managing user access to AI applications, how, where, and what they access. The second is ensuring that your data is protected when entered and created by AI applications. And then finally, driving user accountability for AI use, using it in the ways that we intend and want them to, rather than using it perhaps unsanctioned or contravene corporate policy. Very much for today's on the latter two controls that we'll be looking at. Now, when I speak to organizations and I say, they mention to me, look, we have concerns around using AI in our business, and we want to get our organization in a kind of a totally ready state so that we're happy to unleash it in our business. If we ask them, what does that AI-enabled organization look like to you? Broadly speaking, this is where organizations want to be and where we would also agree. Looking at users can only access data that is intended for them, that you have full visibility of AI tools in use in your organization with preventative controls in place to prevent the usage of unsanctioned tools. The results produced by generative AI, if sensitive, inherit the sensitivity of that original prompt. And then finally, organizations can use of generative AI. Now, when I speak to organizations, and many of you will probably be somewhere between the two, there's a typical starting point, which is organizations have a limited governance around what data a user can access. Organizations have an AI use policy defined, which is we use Copilot, we use ChatGPT, but there's no actual way of enforcing it. So it's more like asking your employees to do you a favor rather than being able to enforce and control that policy. And then finally, there's a limited understanding of what data a user can access. And then finally, there's limited controls around preventing of oversharing of data. So broadly speaking, what we try to do is help organizations understand what this nirvana on the right-hand side can look like for their business, but also how they can move from the left to the right-hand side, working closely with example of what the risk could be in your organization if you don't have some preventative controls in place. Let's say a user goes into Copilot for M365 and asks for a list of most profitable customers in the organization. This might be a disgruntled employee who's planning on leaving and moving to a competitor. Copilot provides the response because the user has access to that data, but doesn't identify that that is highly sensitive information, or that that user is perhaps a risky insider based on behavior. That user can then take that response and send it to themselves on WhatsApp, take that response, print it, take their response, they intend to exfiltrate that data. The issue here is the organization has no visibility into Copilot security controls in place on the document that was produced. We were referring to a sensitive document. The user got that sensitive document and exfiltrated it. And then finally, there is no data loss prevention in place. With Microsoft native technology, all of this can be controlled, from being able to see what data users are doing, to be able to apply protection to the documents themselves, and be able to prevent them from leaving your organization. All of that can be taken care of from cradle to grave. But they say a picture speaks 1,000 words. So rather than describing that to you, what I would like to do is just walk you through some real world examples of how exactly this will operate. So firstly, I want to show you just around how these data governance controls look and feel within the Copilot experience. So let's say a user goes into Copilot within the Word application, and they type a prompt and say, can you give me a short FAQ of Project Obsidian? Copilot says, sure thing, you have access to this data. However, if you notice on the top of this yellow tooltip has applied, and this document is now listed as confidential. The reason for that is the source data that Copilot is referring to that the user has access to is confidential information. Therefore, this prompt, or the response to the prompt, also inherits that same sensitivity. So let's say this user then takes this information, pop it into ChatGPT, the tool they use in their personal life, right? And they say, okay, I need to summarize this sensitive document to my boss so that they understand it in slightly more layman's terms. They pop it into ChatGPT, and what happens here is Purview DLP kicks in and says, you cannot share this information in ChatGPT because it's highly sensitive. And what that's essentially using is a sensitivity label to apply a data loss prevention policy, which can prevent your users putting sensitive information into third-party generative AIs. This also applies to non-generative AI technologies like Gmail, like Dropbox, etc. But this is just being used in this particular application. Let's say another user goes in and they heard at the water cooler in the office someone talking about Project Obsidian, which is a top secret project, but they wanted to learn a little bit more about it. They go into Copilot and say, hey, can you give me a little bit of an overview about Project Obsidian? But because this user does not have access to this, Copilot does not produce a response and says, no idea what you're talking about. There's no such thing as Project Obsidian. Similarly, a different user who does have access to Project Obsidian goes into Copilot and says, hey, can you give me an overview of Project Obsidian again? Copilot says, sure thing. But the key thing to note is Copilot inherits or Teams, even within the Teams interface, it inherits the sensitivity label of the original document, so that this output similarly will, if tried to copy and paste or exfiltrate it in a different form, will also be protected by the native document protections. Let's say a user thinks they can maybe outsmart your security controls, or maybe a user just doesn't know, what they should and shouldn't be doing with particular information. So let's say a user is on their phone, they open up Copilot and they say, hey, can you give me a quick short FAQ on Project Obsidian again? You'll see a recurring theme about Project Obsidian. And then that user says, okay, I want to put that in my personal notes file, or I want to put that in my personal Word document, or I want to put that into a WhatsApp and exfiltrate that data. Using app protection policies in Intune, this action is blocked. Ultimately, because the first application is a work application and the user then tries to copy the information to a non-IT managed application, that action is blocked using app protection policies within Intune. And what that does is it just increases or reduces the the risk surface area when using generative AI in your organization, and ensuring that users are well governed and secured when working on their personal and corporate devices. Next, a hot topic that many organizations are saying is it's great that we can apply these security controls, but actually, what is the size of the challenge we have? And with a newer innovation from Microsoft that was released about November, so it's about 12 months old, is Purview. Within Purview, there's a new capability called Data Security Posture Management, or DSPM. Within DSPM, there is an AI module that allows organizations to get a rich and full understanding of AI use within their organization, and doesn't take a whole lot of time to set up. There's some minor configuration, but we're talking 30 minutes to an hour to set up. to get a visibility at least. To apply the preventative controls takes a little bit longer. But just to show you a little bit of what DSPM for AI looks like, what you'll be able to see is you can get an understanding of what are the AI applications being used in your organization, whether that's Microsoft native or third party, and what the nature of sensitive information being put into these tools are. So for example, what we can see here is the nature of sensitive interaction with different AI tools. And this gives an organization an understanding of what tools are people using, but also what are they using it for? And is there particular departments, if we look at this lower left-hand corner, that are particularly, nefarious for using these third-party tools? And if there's departments like HR, finance, or legal who are using a lot of third-party tools that aren't well governed, and they're putting sensitive information in there, that's naturally an area you should prioritize for remediation. Finally, you can get an understanding of risky insider use. Copilot or generative AI can be a great tool to increase user productivity, but it can allow a user to get access to information across the organization. With insider risk management, you can identify users who, based on their behavior, are likely to be taking risky or malicious actions internally, and you can identify who those users are and ultimately reduce their access appropriately. Additionally to this, Microsoft has introduced a data risk assessment. The data risk assessment ultimately allows organizations to run a ad hoc risk assessment on what is the organizational-wide access to data across particular SharePoints. So what you can do is you can run a risk assessment across your high-risk departments, such as in this example, the HR departments, in a number of different regions. You can choose the locations you run that on, and what Purview will produce is a little bit of a summary in terms of within those departments, we have documents that have high confidential information in them that are not protected, documents that have confidential information in them that can be accessed by anyone in the organization, and that allows organizations to determine where they should focus their time and effort in addressing, oversharing within the organization. Because if a user has access to the information, Copilot will be able to surface it, even if it isn't intended for them. What this will allow organizations to do is identify the potential risk of users having too broad permissions and access, and be able to work on a plan to remediate this. What within the kind of data risk assessment UI, what you can also see is what the challenge is, but also how you can actually remediate it. So not only does it say, look, you have a problem, it says there's 2 ways here that you can actually remediate this problem, and you can work on implementing a quick fix there. Now, naturally, we would suggest working on a much more broader strategy with an organization like Cloud Essentials to ensure that you're considering every possible avenue. But what this kind of allows users to do is democratize how they can secure and manage data within their organization, which in previous and bygone eras was generally quite a complex task. And finally, a lot of organizations will have something deemed an acceptable AI use policy or a similar name, which is broadly, this is how we use AI in our organization, and these are the tools we sanction. However, it can often be rather difficult to identify what tools people are using, and also control what they're doing in these tools. So in addition to being able to prevent users from uploading sensitive information into third-party AI tools, organizations using Defender Cloud Apps can get visibility of all of the AI or AI-enabled applications in their organization, and ultimately see what the high-risk applications are and look to block them. So what we can see on this screen here is filtering on AI applications. We can see that we've got a couple of AI applications in place and a risk score attributed to them. So Copilot, Gemini, and ChatGPT are in use, but aren't deemed sufficiently risky. However, something at the bottom here called Brainwork is deemed very risky. So what you as an organization can do is ultimately tag that application as unsanctioned, and if a user visits that site, they will ultimately get locked out and not able to access it. So what this allows you to do is, one, identify the shadow AI applications in place and block them, but that's very much a whack-a-mole approach where you have to stay one step ahead of the user. And to top and tail that, you can use the data governance and prevention of putting sensitive information into the generative AI applications. So even if you are not aware of the tool the user is using, you can also govern and prevent how they use that as well. And ultimately, with that, what that gives organizations is the ability to move forward with AI with minimal risk to their organization and the peace of mind that they can do so securely. So now moving forward, what we'll do is the team in Cloud Essentials will take you through how they can support you on starting and traversing that journey.
Thanks, Eoin. Afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to be taking you through some of our best practices as Cloud Essentials. I'll take you through our methodology, and I think if Eoin is Mr. Purview, when you say compliance, risk, and governance a bit too much, you might see me appear, especially within our organization at least. I am quite passionate about it, and I look forward to engaging with you all as we proceed. So if I move straight on to our governance methodology, we've obviously heard about the technology. I think a lot of people, most of you on the call, would have or either using Copilot already or some form of generative AI, and you may or may not already also be quite familiar with Microsoft Purview. So in the slides that follow, I'll be taking you through from a compliance and a data governance lens, what does that look like? How do you incorporate that in a way that still makes sense for your business? So what we found is by creating a governance methodology, we're able to incorporate some of the best practices from a data governance perspective and an assurance perspective, but also being a technology company, we can also expose our clients to the best controls from a technology perspective as well. So our methodology very much stands on two key principles. So firstly, when we do give advice on any controls that you implement as an organization, we make sure that it covers people, process, and technology. And as I move on with our slides or with our methodology, rather, you'll see why all of these components are very, very important to the success of your overall data governance strategy as well. And the second principle really involves introducing elements of, if you're from an insurance background, you may or may not have heard the term combined assurance, or from a risk background, which really seeks to incorporate and optimize all assurance functions and services in order to show that when taken as a whole, these really help to enable an effective control environment. So as we proceed, we'll also talk to you about how we're able to also act as what we call a fractional privacy officer, and how that role sort of fills any gaps, even from a combined assurance perspective. But these two principles in our world then translate into what we call our five-step methodology. And if you are a team of one or a team of two, you're wondering how you'd go about, implementing these 5 steps, we are also going to cover that as we proceed. So our step one really is this assess and benchmark phase, where we ensure that our clients really benchmark against what technology they might already have. On one of his last slides, Eoin also went through some of the AI applications, for example, that might already be in use. So that's very similar to what we would do as part of this assess and benchmark phase, but we go further than that. So other than, or in addition to rather, technology validation, what other controls do you have in place? What other regulations do you need to comply with? Are you looking to get ISO 27001 certified or maintain a certification? Or are you looking at, for example, an ISO 42001 instead now in the world of AI? So we really try and understand where you might be as an organization holistically. And our step 2, again, we hear the term risk being used a lot, and how you go about deploying your technology also needs this risk-based approach. So this is where we take our expertise and we apply what we call, and I'm sure a term that you're fairly familiar with, a risk-based approach in order to assist with our clients with building a roadmap. So if you come to us with a plan to say, okay, I'd like to deploy Copilot, what do you need along your roadmap in order to do so in a fairly safe manner. And I'm going to unpack a little bit more on our Copilot assessment as we proceed as well. Our next phase is where we see this combined assurance model really come to life with assembling what we call, and I've seen various iterations of this, compliance panel, a data governance panel, a data governance council, AI governance council. There's really been so many different names for what really is this governing body for a technology deployment while still taking into consideration your compliance and governance obligations. And our steps 4 and 5 really look at the delivery from a technology perspective. And I think we are going to touch on a little bit about our deployment methodology in later slides. And lastly, monitoring and reporting. So if you are a GRC or a governance, risk and compliance professional on the call, it is really important to be able to evidence to the various committees. So if you're reporting into a GRC committee, specifically a risk and compliance committee, we really help to enable our clients to be able to monitor and report any key milestones along the projects, but also just how you're tracking against your existing compliance obligations as well as we proceed. So with that being the basis of our methodology, I'm going to unpack in a little bit more detail what the Cloud Essentials and Microsoft 365 Copilot Maturity Assessment looks like. So on the screen, you'll see there's 5 areas. So you'll see 5 bubbles on the left, which really focus on change management, business and tactical use cases, and in the blue block, content optimization, data security, and data governance. And a lot of this, and I think from a technology implementation perspective, Eoin would have touched on as he was discussing Copilot. But what I always say when discussing this topic, a lot of these controls you would have already needed. So depending on where you are in the world, if you're under the purview of UK regulators, if it's the GDPR, if it's the new the Data Use Act, if you're in South Africa and this POPIA, these are all existing controls or controls that can help you give the technology legs to existing controls that you should have in compliance with data governance and data protection legislation. And we really just help our clients to translate their data privacy requirements. And often we find that with the implementation of Copilot, where organizations and where certain teams were resistant to certain changes and certain implementations, the implementation of Copilot incentivizes a lot of organizations to get their house in order, which then enables and strengthens their data privacy compliance as well, which is why we take this overall data governance approach and not just hone in on one aspect of it. So we find that you're able to do all of this through Microsoft Copilot and through Microsoft Purview. So when I'm going to be discussing specific controls as we go along, similar to Eoin's approach, I'm going to focus on the areas that sit within your areas of or within your responsibility as a client. As we've in the past, if you look at our previous webinars, we've also discussed Microsoft considerations around their governance processes when developing AI, etc. But what we're focusing now is more from a user or organization perspective. So as I've said, the governance considerations for AI. So if we look at the 3 key areas, which again, Eoin's also spoken to, which is promoting user accountability, managing access, and protecting the data entered and created. So if we look at the first area around promoting user accountability, so I think organizations need to be very wary and very aware of not guarding against reinventing the wheel. So the technology, no offense to anyone, is often the easier part, but what's difficult is then ensuring that you have people and process to support your implementation and usage. So it's crucial for organizations to ensure that their processes, people, and technology controls effectively address risks that might be posed by the use of AI. So this will obviously then instill some confidence both among your users as well as stakeholders that you're able to safeguard your organization and obviously be able to use AI in a way that's still going to enable business development while keeping your data safe. So before implementing, if you haven't yet, if you are one of those 3 organizations who haven't yet pull the trigger, it's really important to consider any of the decision-making bodies you might already have in place around your data governance, your data security, as well as any cultural values that might be impacted by your deployment. So although the governance journey, even as I'm speaking, can seem like it's quite a mountain, we do have this step-by-step approach to every phase here. And really, we always start with identifying your regulatory obligations. So it's very important to remember that AI-related regulatory obligations often extend beyond just AI regulations. So I know most people say, well, we only have the EU AI Act for now, or, we don't have definitive legislation yet. But I think most countries, and I'm in no way attempting to summarize all the pieces of legislation and draft legislation that, has an impact on your AI usage, but you are most likely already subject to a number of regulations that would impact your deployment, like data privacy legislation. So as I've said, it's really important that when implementing and from an AI governance perspective, you increase your compliance oversight. So often we do see, again, as Eoin alluded to, that there is this tug of war between various business areas. You'll often find that GRC teams are resistant toward implementation. And of course, it would be on account of things like data privacy regulations, or just fears around what may or may not, or how AI may or may not be utilized in a responsible and ethical manner. So we do see, and I've seen many policies drafted without the technology to really support it, or I see people piggybacking off acceptable usage policies, and often we see the creation of standalone AI. So it's very important that even if you do opt for a standalone AI policy, again, it's not uncommon in our experience that you are very mindful that it is specific to your organization, that you do understand that any apologies, that it is really important that you factored into your organization's responsible and ethical use. And when it comes to AI governance, you really need to make sure that your data is being used appropriately and that sensitive information is safeguarded. So together with forming, if you already have an existing task force or panel, as we said earlier, that might take care of your data privacy, either that panel could be used to address your AI as well, or you could have a standalone AI governance. And this really ensures that no business unit gets left behind when deploying your technology, and that your compliance goals remain aligned and all stakeholders continually work together. So what we've also found is how important stakeholder education is. And I understand we all have access to AI. It's as simple as, well, it seems as simple as sending a prompt, but it's really important that users are educated on AI's risks and rewards, as well as the ethical implementation and implications. So we often find people organizing AI workshops or AI open days for board members and executives, as well as for staff, just to reinforce what might seem like essential basic AI concepts. It's also really important that if you are choosing to set out or create an AI policy, that you formalize your ethical standards, as well as the intention behind using AI responsibly. It's well, further, either within your policy or together with your considerations, obviously understanding and unpacking any of your regulatory obligations. In addition, exploring any other AI use cases and associated risks. What's very key, especially around this area, is obviously establishing accountability. So this usually goes together with either your Copilot panel or your compliance panel, or whatever you're choosing to call it. And we definitely recommend assigning roles and responsibilities as early as possible to establish this clear accountability from the get-go, as well as clarifying any governance protocols that you might or that you need to have in place. So this is obviously to ensure that your AI usage consistently upholds the ethical and risk management controls that you have set. So obviously, in order to make this as user-friendly as possible, you'll also need to document your policy using plain language, and then share this documentation across your organization, preferably, apologies, as part of a wider AI training program that educates each and every stakeholder and user on AI-related risks, rules, and responsibilities. We often, as part of these assessments, will ask questions around, do you understand and are you able to recognize AI or bias within AI responses? And often people will say yes, because you think it might be that obvious, but unless you're actually monitoring this, running simulations and testing, I don't think it's as easy as people might think it is. So it's very important that within your policy, you also include things like monitoring and other reviews periodically, so that, again, it's not just a piece of paper. You actually have ways in order to monitor and enforce your policy. And I suppose in the slides that follows, we're going to talk about just some of, and again, this may overlap with a little bit of what you've heard already from Eoin around just managing your access. And what we would often do during our assessment phase is just understanding what's currently used. And as you've seen, there are ways to be able to pick that up within your organization, be able to risk rate that. But also, there should be measures in place to ensure that only employees who have the necessary awareness and training can then access those relevant apps, because it's really important when embarking on a deployment project or AI deployment project that you do so even in a risk-based approach, so that you can. So this often comes into place when people say, okay, I want to apply for a license. How do I get one? So how do you decide who within your organization gets to use it? So when establishing this timeline of who should be given access and the level of training, you should also consider the user themselves. So you need to understand their experience and exposure to understand any legal or reputational impact that might result as or due to their usage of AI. So it's very important to realize that while implementing the technology could be a simpler process without doing all this training and engagement, it really wouldn't be adopted and used in an appropriate manner if it doesn't involve your people and process, and it doesn't involve this level of stakeholder engagement that truly is required. So look at the next data and created it to, again, this is nothing new. This, again, you'd need to have in place from a data privacy perspective, just controlling who has access. And previously, we've even engaged with organizations who thought things like multi-factor authentication might have been perceived as too restrictive, especially if you're in a busy environment and you need to share data and you're not able to do it as fast as you'd like, for example. So we've seen quite a few debates around this, but we've seen perception shift now with the introduction and usage of things like Microsoft 365 Copilot. So this really just ensures that, yes, there's always going to be risk. So there's going to be risk accessing any data and anyone accessing your data as an employee, but it's about getting your risk to a level of acceptability. And these are some of the controls that obviously you can see on the screen as well that can assist you with doing that. So if we really move on to our next slide, just around data security, and again, we do many of these engagements around data classification, data loss prevention, or information protection, and really just the way in which we work right now around being very mobile, and just understanding that there is these concepts of boundaries and perimeters around your data doesn't exist as materially as they may have existed in the past. So Copilot can access your content, and in order to do so, and in order to protect what it might access, you obviously need to protect your data and classify your data in a responsible manner by going through this data classification process, because in its very form, data classification is a means of protecting your data from unauthorized disclosure, alteration, or destruction based on how sensitive or impactful it is. And as we all know, data right now has become a currency on its own, but it's also not true that not all that, or it's also true rather that not all data is equal in terms of sensitivity and risk. Therefore, it's even more critical for you as an organization to take, again, this risk-based approach in order to manage how you classify and label your data to ensure that there is adequate and consistent protection. And yet again, we see that this is another example of existing data privacy controls that can assist you with ensuring that your Copilot deployment or your usage of generative AI is also less risky. So companies that correctly classify data, even now, under the GDPR, for example, can comply with regulations in the event of an audit, for example, by being able to prove compliance by logging, tracking, and reporting sensitive data usage. So here, again, is a really good overlap between existing data privacy legislation as well as just being able to use things like generative AI in a safe way. So a well-crafted data classification policy allows for the tactical deployment of sensitivity labels. And again, we saw with Eoin earlier where he demonstrated how important the need for protection to follow your content. So it really helps to facilitate content classification based on sensitivity and risk, which really means that that security, and because that document can now live anywhere, the control and the security around it can also move with the content. So if I just move on to collaboration hygiene, and this again just speaks to around protecting and making sure that your data is secure. And really, if we look at, and I can't believe it's been 5 years, but if we think back to 5 years ago when people were rushing for the deployment of collaboration tools due to COVID, because now there was this requirement. However, it has become just a way of the way in which we work. So we'd like to see it now. So it isn't even as common nowadays for people to attach documents. Instead, we share things like links, which allows for more collaboration and reduces rework. So modern features that usually impact collaboration hygiene are things like anonymous links. So anonymous links are links that when shared can be accessed by anyone. Or we also see things like abandoned team sites, which sometimes might contain important documentation. So it's important that you make sure that access controls and user permissions are set up properly so that you can regulate as well Copilot's access to the data and keep everything secure. And by understanding how information is shared within your company, you can then identify any potential oversharing and refine sharing protections. And if I move on to just around how we manage or assess from a data governance perspective, and we are going to get into a little bit more detail on that, but to really get the most out of Microsoft 365 Copilot, it's important to have a solid data governance strategy and perspective, both from a security perspective, rather, as well as just ensuring that data, which then is risk as well. So this this means rather ensuring that your data doesn't contain any rot, which is redundant, outdated, and trivial information. And by doing so, you can reduce your data governance risk, as well as optimize any results from Copilot. So one key area to focus and something that we work on even in our capacity as fractional privacy advisors is around assisting with things like retention policies, which may or may not have been already addressed as part of your privacy compliance journey. So we see organizations with either very aggressive retention policies, like retaining large volumes of data, and as well as those who would rather keep everything forever. So we see people deleting very aggressively, but also those who want to keep forever. So there obviously needs to be some sort of balance, because the risk that this carries is that outdated content is not necessarily being left dormant. It is potentially becoming quite active again through the usage of Copilot. So it's really important that as part of your overall data governance strategy, you're also able to identify any stale data, but also your strategy must provide for retention and disposition processes as well. So the true value of your Copilot experience largely depends on the data sources as well, indexed by your Microsoft 365. So with access to comprehensive organizational data, your Copilot usage can really suggest more relevant and personalized content as well, and obviously doing so in a safe manner based on what you are allowed to see. So I think on that note, I'm going to just discuss how we put this into practice with things like a maturity assessment, because again, we say that we do see organizations waiting to do an assessment like this and then switching on, or switching on and then trying to backfill those processes by making sure that their risk is covered. So how we often do this is by completing assessments across key areas. So by meeting with technical teams, as well as your governance, risk, and compliance team, where we see the most amount of resistance often, but also from a data privacy perspective, because of this large impact on data privacy compliance, just making sure that if there was a DPIA or a data privacy impact assessment done, what are those recommendations and how do you bring that to life during the process? And during your implementation process. And again, it's not often easy to run an assessment like this in-house. And I think with the slides that follow, Johann will also talk through just how we assist our clients with completing something like a Microsoft 365 Copilot assessment, and really help to give them a view of their landscape, but also equip them in making the decision as to whether their risk is at an acceptable level to proceed with the deployment, and take into consideration who should get access, what they should get access to, as well as what policies and processes need to be updated or remediated based on our assessment as well. So I think with that, I'm going to hand over to Johann just to take us through how we would typically assist our clients with this.
Thank you very much, Nivasha. So we formulated a solution called Data Governance as a Service with Microsoft. And really the concept of a fractional privacy and information officer is core to the solution from Cloud Essentials. Our Data Governance as a Service solution is basically a subscription to our professional services, where you can get access to a multidisciplinary team ranging from technical Microsoft Purview solution experts and solution architects, but also importantly, access to information governance and compliance specialists, where they assist with providing advisory services, from assisting with drafting policies or reviewing your existing policies, and even maturing existing policies when new requirements like the age of AI comes around, to making sure you align with your regulatory and legal obligations. This service is really designed to ensure that you are constantly maturing your compliance stance using Microsoft Purview, proactively mitigating risks and getting maximum value from your Microsoft 365 investments. And really at the top of the pyramid, or at the tip of the spear, is our data governance panel. So just maybe back to you, Nivasha, just to give context of what is our data governance panel and why it's critical to our ongoing services.
Thanks, Johann. So I think I've alluded to this a few times throughout my discussion as well earlier, just around how important it is to create this task force around managing either your AI deployment, or if you already have one, for your data governance or your data privacy journey. So what we really do is help our clients to create this within their environment, And really, we see setting up this panel helps to establish accountability within the organization, but also helps to move priorities along. So often we find, depending on who's steering the committee, certain priorities or certain tasks get priority over the other, whereas with creating this data governance panel, it's really a central point of contact for moving your progress along your Purview deployment, as well as any AI and including AI within your agenda, while still maintaining momentum with your technology deployment and keeping track of any of your regulatory and compliance priorities as well. We should see it as a working group that brings together the various areas of the business, so that typically if there are or were any blockers in the past, they can form part of the panel and rather help to create this or help to create more informed decision making as well. So what we bring to the panel, in addition to being able to give technology guidance, we're also able to give regulatory guidance. A typical example would be an organization that wants to retain everything, yet they actually can't afford to due to rising storage costs or due to legislation that says you shouldn't be keeping this data past certain dates. And these things often would come through to the panel, and there's competing interests, and the panel will really help to make those decisions, but also bring together any compliance and risk advice that people on the panel might need to make the decision, but also give any options they might have from a technology perspective. So we really see this tool or this structure outliving even our engagements with clients, where they're able to create this body to help track any of their data governance projects, as well as any future deployments around AI and data governance.
Awesome. Thank you, Nivasha. So that leads us into the core of the services, where we run separate Microsoft Purview implementation workstream depending on the prioritization and decisions that was taken in the data governance panel. What this is essentially implementation work streams for each Microsoft Purview solution. So whether you are new to Microsoft Purview and start off with foundational implementation of information protection, starting off with manual labeling and some form of data loss prevention, we take all the work streams through the same steps. So adopting the well-known crawl, walk, run approach, where we start off with doing proper knowledge transfer so that you as an organization gets to know what is the capabilities available within Microsoft Purview for each of the solution. You see the solution in action. So whether it is sensitivity labeling, we have an interactive demo session showing you the possible of what the potential end state is when you actually adopt sensitivity labeling within your organization. Once you've got a clear or more of an understanding of the solution, that leads into the design phase, where we design the policies of each of the work streams, whether it is the deployment of which DLP policy we need to enforce on endpoints or on SharePoint or team locations. And that design document is really a technical solution document, giving your architects and your specialists in your company information that they can utilize to understand how Purview will be deployed. The configuration phase is really us assisting your team with configuring the solution within your Microsoft 365 tenant, enabling the technology in the back end, but not affecting any end users at this stage. We also utilize this configuration phase to do the initial testing and fine-tuning of the policies in the case where we are trying to automate application of sensitivity labeling on sensitive information types. We run those policies in simulation mode and utilize the review action within those simulations to fine-tune the policies before they are deployed to your users, so that we can ensure that we don't affect the business in any negative form. Before it is mass deployed, we always include a pilot deployment aimed to getting your champions on board with the program, them being the trailblazers of and really assisting us with defining and maturing our change management process within the organization. It's also then utilized to fine-tune and remediate any errors that we might need to get the most effectiveness of the policies and eliminate any unexpected false positives when it comes to automated controls being implemented. And then just lastly is the deployment, where we then in a phased approach roll the solution out to your organization. But obviously very important to know, and I think most of us know, that Purview is never an implement and forget solution, the same for any data governance solution. And that's why we underpin our data governance as a service with this ongoing services, that where we extend our services to help you continue to enhance and mature your data governance utilizing Purview. So even from ongoing advisory, compliance, and regulatory services, like I mentioned, assisting, reviewing, and maturing of your policies, to utilizing the Purview native reporting, but also Power BI based reporting to look for patterns to drive continuous enhancements. For example, if we identify users utilizing a specific SharePoint site that is linked to a sensitive HR data, and they continuously manually increase the level of protection on files, we can utilize automated label or default label at a site level to make that process a lot simpler for them, so that they don't have to manually increase those type of files within that SharePoint library. We also then assist with incident responses and support, and offer investigation. So if there's a data breach or somebody gained access to confidential data, we can utilize the Microsoft Purview functionality and audit to assist you with handling those data breaches within the Microsoft Purview environment, and even extending it into the Defender landscape if you are utilizing SIEM and Sentinel and solutions like that. We're also assisting with the ongoing monitoring and alerting by providing governance reports. So output from the adoption metrics from Purview, how are users utilizing the controls, how are they applying labels, what the other policies are being triggered, and all that metrics again drives this continuous enhancements within the program. And I think Nivasha already mentioned our ongoing monthly steerco or data governance panel that drives the direction on prioritization of all the maturity actions required for Purview. So that's really at a brief our ongoing data governance as a service solution built on top of Purview. So I think that's it from me. I'll hand you over back to Gethin to wrap today's session up and some next interesting steps.
Yeah, thanks very much, guys. Some, I guess, key takeaways I want to just jump on to start with. I know we've only got a couple of minutes, so I'll kind of rush through this just to give you the next step of that exciting workshop that we've got to offer. But just to summarize some of the key points I think that I picked up as we've gone along. So, you know, things like Microsoft 365 Pilot, the Copilot readiness is all relative. It's not a one-size-fits-all concept, and we can help at any stage of that deployment from the Cloud Essentials team. As we discussed earlier, you know, mitigating risk is a people, process, and technology conversation. Our advice is always take a pragmatic approach to assessing risk in context, and then to also align with multiple stakeholders. We've discussed it a lot today for maximum success. So think of this more as a team sport. It's a collaboration between risk and IT roles. You can pick up some further info via our website, and we can also encourage you to sign up for our monthly newsletter on that to keep up to date with what's going on with the Cloud Essentials team as well. But if I just finish off now, just before we go, thank you everyone for attending, obviously. It's been a great session. I mentioned at the start that we have a very exciting follow-on opportunity to everyone attending today. It's an Art of the Possible workshop, a great opportunity to discuss this with the Cloud Essentials team on a one-to-one basis and really think about what comes next. Consists of, it's an hour session with our specialist team where we will dive deeper into the capabilities and what's available to you with your licensing, looking at what benefits they could bring, perhaps what you're not making use of already. We look further at sort of real life scenarios that demonstrate, how people, process, technology comes together to meet governance, risk, and compliance requirements. And we can give you some, real guidance on how to get started, who needs to be involved, and how you start your deployment journey. So I put my email address on the screen. There is a chance to extend that workshop. So the first few to sign up for one of these sessions by emailing me directly, we'll extend that time to 90 minutes. So I'll look out for my inbox crashing in the next 10 minutes, and we'll see how we get on with that. There are some caveats for qualification for this. So for you to be able to get, any benefit from this workshop, for example. So based on licensing you may have available to you, but I can let you know about that as we go. Thanks again, everyone. Big thank you to Eoin Fahy from Microsoft. It's been a pleasure and great to have you with us today, Eoin. And of course, thanks to our specialist team from Cloud Essentials, Nivasha and Johann.